So let's get straight into it and start with some of the questions around art supplies. So one of the questions was about how to get over the intimidation of using long-handled brushes. And this might apply for maybe other bigger tools. Sometimes it can feel funny or even a bit awkward using oversized painting tools, but they offer so much in the way of freedom. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So let me just get them. And there's two different types. So we've got the long-handled ones and also the shorter-handled ones. These are Dina Wakley brushes. They're media brushes. And you can see how much I've loved using these over the years. And what I find with them is that they help you to loosen up because you can hold them right at the end and get a lot of loose wrist action, which is great for abstract painting, especially when you're trying to make those loose gestural marks. The other thing is that because of their length, when you're painting, what you're getting is a bit of distance between you and your painting, which means that you can see more of it. You can see the whole thing, and that means when you make a move, you can see the impact of that on other areas of the painting. Whereas if you're working up close and really getting into something like this, you're not necessarily seeing the big picture. So that's one of the reasons I love a long-handled brush. So as far as getting over the intimidation side of it, I really think it's about just giving it a go. I mean, you could even attach a stick to one of your short-handled brushes, tape it up with some tape, and just have a go with it without investing in purchasing the long-handled brushes, and see how it feels, because it's going to encourage some of that freedom that you might get with doing things like painting with your eyes shut or using your non-dominant hand. It's going to get that loose energy in. So it's a wonderful tool and technique to use. So I hope that helps, and I really encourage you to just give the long-handled brushes a try. I mean, you'll see over here I also have loads of short-handled brushes too, so it's all about having variety in your tools. Let's move on to one of the other questions, which is around what do I use for my palette. So I have here a tear-off paper palette. This is the Montmartre brand. I get these from the local art shop. They're very affordable, and I just find they're very easy because these, they feel like baking paper. They've kind of got a coating on them, and you can use them. If you have a look on here, it's suitable for oil, acrylic, and watercolor. So very versatile surface. Next question was around gesso, and I love to prepare my canvases with gesso even if the canvases come pre-primed. I do that because often the pre-primed canvases only have a thin layer of gesso and the paint still kind of seeps into the canvas surface. So what I'm doing is effectively priming the canvas so that I don't have to use as much paint, and you can also create a lovely surface to work on. And the specific question I was asked was whether I sand between the layers of gesso. So this is the gesso that I often use. So this is an Art Spectrum brand, another Australian brand. I do apologise if you are on the other side of the world. A lot of the products that I use are Australian, but this is a very standard gesso. You could use an alternative brand. What I tend to do is apply several coats of this, but I don't actually sand it in between. Sanding will give you a smoother surface. So if you want that really smooth texture and you kind of want to get rid of the weave of the canvas, sanding will help with that. But for the work that I do, I don't feel like having a really smooth surface is important. If I was doing very detailed work, maybe portraiture or something like that, I would invest time and energy in the sanding process. But I want to get on with painting. So I try and make it as easy as possible, and I just do a couple of coats of gesso, no sanding whatsoever. And sometimes I even play around with the texture of the gesso. So I will scrape tools into it or use something like a thicker gesso. This is a super heavy gesso by Liquitex. I would apply this with a palette knife and then, create some texture. So it depends on what kind of surface you want to get. So have a play around with gesso and the different ways that you can apply it. Another question that I've had is around sourcing art supplies at wholesale prices. And this is an interesting one because, to be honest, I don't actually get many of my art supplies from a wholesaler as such. What I tend to find is that most retail shops provides generous sales from time to time. So whether you're in Australia or if you're in America, places like Michael's and things like that, they have big sales on their products, and often those discounts can be more than a wholesale rate. There are places that you can look at for wholesale prices, but often they are more for selling to retail shops than selling to individual artists, so they can be a bit hard to find. I did track down one in Australia which is called Art Supplies Australia. It's an online supplier that does offer art supplies at a discount below the retail price, so that's one that you could check out. I also have a question about what to do when you're working with soft pastels and how do you seal your work and deal with all the dust that can come up. I don't use a lot of soft pastels just for that very reason. They can be very dusty, but there are some supplies that can help with that. So I would suggest getting a fixative, and you might want to try one that is specific to soft pastels. And there is one that I know of here, which is the Sennelier brand. So this one here is a fixative that you can use on soft pastels. So that's going to help hold everything in place. It's a fixative, which means that you can continue to work on your piece. So you could use this a few times if you were layering to keep it from being so dusty. So that's what I would use to help with the fixing of things in place. And then as a final varnish, you could either just go with the fixative and that's it, but if you want an extra layer of protection, you could use something like the Golden Archival Spray Varnish. This will change the color of your pastels a little bit. It will deepen the colors. So you might want to do a test sheet with both of these products to see what the impact is upon your pastels. That's something that is tricky because the pastels will always look a bit different without a product on them, but you do need to protect them and hold them into place. So have a play around with products like these. And this one here, just to give you another option, this is a Helmer fixative, and this is more of a general purpose fixative that you could use on, it says here, pastels, charcoal, pencil, chalk, watercolor, crayon, India ink. So this is very much a general purpose fixative, and you could use this to help hold your mixed media supplies in place. This is a useful thing to have as a mixed media artist because we're always working with different things. And I just want to share with you that I quite often add an additional layer of varnish to my painting. So I may use a spray varnish to get everything in place. And then if I want it to have that more varnished feel, I will add a coat of brush-on varnish. I only ever do this once everything is fixed into place because otherwise things are going to smudge, and I have definitely learnt that the hard way. So the brush-on varnish, this one is a Matisse brand. This is a terps-based varnish. It's kind of stinky, yucky kind of stuff. It does give the painting a really nice finish. I would apply this with a nice silky flat brush. Also, don't forget to use one of these if you are using the terps-based or solvent-based varnishes. Always make sure you're wearing some kind of protection. So I'm just going to answer a couple more questions. These are more process-related things. So one of them was around staying loose when you're doing sketch work. So in the class, I do some rough sketches, mostly from my imagination. And these are just simple line drawings. And when you are looking to create abstract art, you want to get away from realism, which can be really challenging when you're used to painting maybe in a more traditional way. So I have got some suggestions for you around keeping your sketches childlike. So one of them would be to do a continuous contour drawing. So to not worry about shading or adding in details, but to just draw outlines of things. And that can be a really helpful way of sketching and keeping it simple. And another thing is to do it as a continuous line. So don't take your pen off the page, and that can be a wonderful way as well to keep it loose. You could also do a blind contour drawing. So that's where you actually look at the subject. So if you were out in nature, you could look at the scene and not look at your piece of paper and just draw it as you see it. So you're looking at it while you're drawing it. So that's a blind contour drawing, and that's another way that you could loosen up your sketches. I also find just the tools that you use. So if you were to use something like ink, it's very sort of splashy and messy, that might help. Or if you use like a big, thick, chunky texture. I used to do a lot of drawings with my kids, Crayola, big, thick textures, things like that that encourage play, or crayons. That might help as well. So try to, I guess, embrace your inner child with your sketches to keep them loose. This one is about colors. How many colors do I tend to use in my paintings, and do I always stick to my chosen palette? So you will have seen that I love to create, I guess, a little swatch or some kind of color story as inspiration for my paintings. Usually I look to have about 3 to 5 colors in those. And the reason for that is that's enough colors, I guess, to have variety. I can mix those colors together to get more of a range, but it also, I guess, limits the possibility so it doesn't become overwhelming and chaotic and confusing and every color of the rainbow is in there. So I find 3 to 5 colors is a really useful number. And within that, you can choose to have one color as maybe your more dominant color. So when you look at the painting, you'll often get a feel for it, as in like, oh, that's a very blue painting, or it's a very peachy painting. So you've got kind of a dominant color there. And then you might have a supporting color, and then like an accent color, like a pop of something. So I quite like using like a pop of cobalt blue or a salmon pink, like brighter pink, something like that as an accent. So I find it useful to think in that way. So 3 to 5 colors, a main color, a supporting color, and a accent color. And then as far as whether I deviate from my plan, absolutely. Sometimes I'll throw in a new color. I think it's important to always be inspired by what's actually happening on your canvas, as well as maybe your intentions that you set at the beginning. So if I am halfway through a painting and it just feels like, ooh, I'd love to add a bit of mustard yellow or something like that, I absolutely will add that in and try it out. And sometimes I'll add it to my swatch first. So if I have a swatch sheet, I'll dab it on there, see how it looks, and then onto the canvas. So the last question is about the fact that I don't often use realistic colors. So even though I draw inspiration from nature, when I paint something like a body of water, it may not necessarily be the color that you would see it out in nature. And I might emphasize, I might make it a brighter blue, or it might not be blue at all. It might be, I might add in pink and other colors. So the question was really around why I do that and what's that all about. Abstract art is about letting go of realism. And when you look at examples of abstract art, you will often see different colors being used, unrealistic scale of things. So this is where you get to be creative. You have the permission to do things differently. And that's one of the things that I love about it the most. So you get to be creative and use different colors, and it brings excitement and new energy to your work. And I don't know, if you think about going back in history and you look at an artist, say like Matisse, and he's got a very famous portrait painting where he paints one half of the painting green. So it's a face. I think it might be, I don't know who it is. I think it's his wife or something like that. But anyway, half of the face is vibrant green, and it's called the green stripe or something like that. That was just considered so revolutionary at the time, to paint a portrait using a different color. And then that sparked a whole movement of art around that. So we get to do things differently, and that's what's so exciting about making art. We get to think outside the box and mix things up. Whatever you think of, it's good to push out your comfort zone with art. So I encourage you to do that, and I hope you found it helpful.